Andrei Belyakov, known as the new Wagner leader, has moved to eliminate Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian General Staff. Wagner soldiers under Belyakov's command assassinated the Russian general Gerasimov. The new Wagner leader Belyakov has taken action to complete the coup that Prigozhin failed to achieve. Wagner's army has begun to appear again within the borders of Moscow. The sabotages initiated by Andrei Belyakov within the borders of Russia have begun to frighten the Russian people. February 24th of last year, the war between Russia and Ukraine, which began on December 19, is about to fill its 19th month. Prigozhin, who died in recent weeks, led Wagner soldiers to get out of control. Thousands of Wagner soldiers, who began withdrawing from Ukrainian territory on Prigozhin's orders, continue their lives within the borders of Belarus. Wagner soldiers, who were taken under protection by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, continue their activities in Belarus. Lukashenko began to establish training headquarters for the joint work of Belarusian and Wagner soldiers. Lukashenko has made it easier for Wagner soldiers to enter Belarus by opening Belarusian border crossings. However, after Prigozhin lost his life, the new Wagner commander Andrei Belyakov, who suddenly appeared, has taken control of the Wagner army. Belyakov, who has been fighting on Ukrainian territory, together with the Wagner army since the beginning of the war, continues to control the Wagner army from within the borders of Belarus. But the most interesting event was the assassination of the Russian general Valery Gerasimov by the new Wagner leader Andrei Belyakov. As it is known, there were some personal problems between Prigozhin and Gerasimov. Wagner soldiers fighting for Vladimir Putin on the territory of Ukraine were tried to be eliminated by Gerasimov's order. Expressing that Wagner soldiers are a great burden to the Russian government, Gerasimov banned Wagner soldiers from using weapons and ammunition found in the Russian army inventory. Thus, Wagner soldiers could only use weapons and ammunition purchased by the Wagner Company, and now the Wagner army is mobilizing to take revenge on Gerasimov. Wagner soldiers, who had been living within the borders of Belarus for 2 months, began to return to Moscow. Wagner soldiers, who continued to enter Moscow by illegal means, began to organize again in Russia. The Wagner soldiers, who formed various groups among themselves and began to take part in formations affiliated to the Wagner Company, began to annoy the government. Lieutenant Sergei Narishkin, the head of the Russian intelligence service, tried to find out what the Wagner soldiers were trying to plan by placing agents inside these structures. The information learned by the Russian informants planted caused a great panic in the Kremlin palace. With the information obtained from sources close to the Kremlin, the reason for the Wagner army's return to Moscow was learned. The main purpose of the Wagner soldiers, who have been activated in Russia again, is to disturb the public peace and spread fear and panic among the people by organizing attacks on high-ranking Russian officials. The new Wagner commander, Andrei Belyakov, aims to plan attacks on Russian bureaucrats by setting up special assassination teams in Moscow. The first target of Wagner soldiers is the chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. As it is known, a dozen explosives were found planted on the Bolshoi-Moskvoretsky Bridge located within the borders of Moscow in recent weeks. These explosives, which were defused by bomb disposal agents, had been a major topic of the agenda in Russia. It has not been found out who and for what these explosives were placed. However, with the new information obtained by the Russian intelligence service, it was revealed by whom these explosives were planted. These explosives had been planted by Wagner soldiers in order to eliminate Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian General Staff. This information, which was learned thanks to the confessions of some Wagner soldiers who agreed to leave the Wagner army and join the Russian army, led to a red alert being issued in the Kremlin palace. Russian special forces teams had searched the surrounding area for hours in order to find out who planted these explosives that were destroyed on the Moskvoretsky Bridge, but no result had been obtained. The Russian intelligence service believed that these explosives were planted for Russian leader Vladimir Putin. However, the real face of the business was found out much later. Wagner soldiers, who continued their activities within the borders of Russia, were following every move of Russian General Valery Gerasimov during the day. When he realized that Gerasimov was constantly using the Moskvoretsky Bridge in Moscow, he thought that they would eliminate Gerasimov with explosives that he would place on this bridge. But things did not go as planned, and this assassination plan of Wagner's soldiers failed. But the real interesting thing started after that. The new Wagner commander Andrei Belyakov has taken action again in order to complete the coup that Prigozhin left unfinished. Belyakov, who continues his activities by establishing new organizations within the borders of Russia, continues to lead the Wagner army through Belarus because he is wanted in Russia. Thus, it was learned that the explosion that took place in the capital Moscow recently was carried out by Belyakov. The place where the explosion took place was a secret ammunition depot belonging to the Russian armed forces. The location of this ammunition depot, which will be used in case of emergency, was known only to senior Russian officials. The explosion of this ammunition depot belonging to the Russian army made Vladimir Putin very nervous. Now it has become a much bigger problem to find out that this explosion was carried out by Belyakov. Immediately after this explosion, the chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, stated that this explosion was not an ordinary explosion and was clearly sabotage. For this reason, the first name that came to mind was the new Wagner leader Andrei Belyakov. Wagner soldiers, who continue their activities within the borders of Russia, are trying to harm Russia and the Russian economy by following the orders they received from Belyakov. However, how Wagner's army found out the location of this secret ammunition depot has left a big question mark on the minds. This explosion was advertised to the Russian media in a very different way. We were told that the warehouse does not belong to the army, but to the Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska. It was also stated that there are parts necessary for steel production in the warehouse. However, soon after, the Wagner leader, Andrei Belyakov, made a statement to take responsibility for this explosion. Belyakov, who shared on his social media account, shared a post that he was responsible for the explosion that occurred in Moscow, and that this was just the beginning. Expressing that he was aware that the Russian army suffered a great deal of damage with this explosion, Belyakov stated that he was aware of the location of many secret warehouses belonging to the Russian armed forces. With Belyakov's explanation, it became known to the whole world that the explosion was carried out by Wagner soldiers, and that this warehouse belonged to the army. The fact that Wagner soldiers made sabotage attempts against Russia made Russian leader Vladimir Putin very angry. The thing that Putin was most angry about was that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko allowed Wagner soldiers to live in Belarus. While Wagner commander Andrei Belyakov continues to lead Wagner troops from within the borders of Belarus, Lukashenko remains silent on this situation. A meeting between Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko is scheduled to take place soon. According to claims, Putin will meet with Lukashenko for the expulsion of Wagner soldiers from Belarus.